I have a rendezvous with death. We'll preserve the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
No fear. No political correctness. No wokeism. You're listening to Underground USA.
Thanks for listening, downloading, and sharing. My name is Frank Salvador. You can find everything we do at undergroundusa.com. In a world where we've been duped into believing that everyone's individual truth must be accepted and embraced, even at the expense of facts and reality, I suppose the statement, "there is no defense for what they do," could apply to many people, entities, and organizations. But as the virtue-signaling globalist left in the United States continues to turn a blind eye to the lethal dangers streaming by the tens of thousands over our open borders each month, it's time to overstate the blatantly obvious. There's no defense, no rationale, no excuse for the U.S. federal government, as well as the many state, county, and local governments, to do absolutely nothing to thwart and, in fact, facilitate, in many cases, the entry into our republic of criminal gangs from Venezuela, El Salvador, and Mexico. With every passing day, they embed themselves into our country like roaches into a tenement building. This isn't about extending a benevolent hand to third world downtrodden in an effort to help them live better. This is about well-financed and organized criminal gangs, aided by faux governments to the United States, strategically rooting themselves in our country to occupy and profiteer from their chosen trades, drug and human trafficking through the use of obscene and horrific uses of violence. As reported in the New York Post, the vicious Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua has expanded its territory to at least 16 U.S. states, an area that includes half of America's population. Homeland Security officials last week were warned in an internal Department intelligence memo that Tren de Aragua's growing presence across the country, most recently in Washington, D.C., Virginia, Montana, and Wyoming. The gang already has footholds in California, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Louisiana, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Wisconsin, according to the memo. The gang has only increased in violent tendencies as it spreads, the memo added. In late August 2024, shocking videos surfaced of gun-wielding Tren de Aragua members storming an apartment building in Aurora, Colorado. This incident was part of a series of events leading local authorities to finally acknowledge the presence of the gang in the community. Incredulously, and assumably because it was during the heat of the 2024 general election cycle, local authorities downplayed claims of the gang having taken over the city. In June 2024, a 19-year-old member of Tren de Aragua was charged with shooting 2 New York City police officers in Queens. This incident was cited as part of a broader pattern of criminal activities by the gang, with the suspect showing no remorse about the shootings, stating it was common practice to open fire on police in Venezuela. Tren de Aragua is heavily engaged in human trafficking, particularly women and girls for the sex trade and debt bondage, kidnappings for ransom, extortion of protection fees, drug trafficking, including cocaine, MDMA, and pink cocaine, a mix involving ketamine, arms trafficking, theft and robbery, including retail theft, street robberies, and home invasions, money laundering, prostitution, particularly in migrant shelters or areas with high migrant populations, and violent crimes, including murder, assault, and intimidation to maintain control or expand their influence, including high-profile incidents like the shootings of law enforcement and civilians. And like Tren Aragua, the El Salvadoran gang, MS-13, is entrenched in the United States with a significant presence in California, particularly in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and the Central Valley, New York, notably active on Long Island and New York City, Virginia, Maryland, Texas, and Houston and Dallas, Massachusetts, Nevada, Washington, D.C., North Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, and Florida, particularly in Miami. Their presence has also been felt in Illinois, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. In September of 2016, two teenage girls, Niska Mickens, 15, and Kayla Cuevas, 16, both civilians, were viciously attacked and killed in Brentwood, New York. They were beaten, hacked, and stabbed to death by members of MS-13. One of the victims was stabbed over 50 times, and both were mutilated in an act meant to terrorize the community and establish MS-13's dominance. The attack was in retaliation for perceived slights against the gang. These are just two of the more than 33,000 organized criminal gangs, including street gangs, motorcycle gangs, and prison gangs, currently operating in the United States. Of those 33,000, thousands of the most vicious groups, with splinter groups numbering in additional thousands, come from Mexico, Central America, and South America. Currently, the top 5 most violent street gangs in the United States, based on notoriety, reported violence, and law enforcement focus, are MS-13, Barrio Azteca, 18th Street Gang, the Mexican Mafia, La M, and the Bloods and Crips. Left unaddressed, this list will soon include Tren de Aragua. It's prudent to note that some commonalities exist between the most notorious gangs operating in the United States. They all engage in drug trafficking, human trafficking, prostitution, and extortion. Of particular note are the crimes of drug trafficking and human trafficking. The most lethal drugs that organized criminal gangs trade in within the United States include fentanyl, methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and synthetic opioids. Fentanyl has a potency of 50 to 100 times that of morphine. Even small doses can be lethal. A significant amount of fentanyl, both in its pure form and mixed with other drugs, comes across the southern U.S. border. Mexican drug cartels, particularly the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels, have been major players in producing and smuggling fentanyl. Recent seizures indicate that millions of lethal doses are intercepted each year, with estimates suggesting that in 2024, Mexican authorities seized quantities sufficient for hundreds of millions of lethal doses. There have been approximately 275,473 fentanyl-related deaths from 2020 to 2023. Methamphetamine, or meth, while not as immediately lethal as fentanyl, can lead to severe health issues including heart failure, stroke, and addiction-related deaths. Much of the methamphetamine in the U.S. comes from Mexico, where cartels have industrialized meth production. In 2024, significant quantities were reported to have been seized at or near the southern U.S. border, with law enforcement in various states like California and Tennessee linking large shipments directly to Mexican cartels. Then we have the big H, heroin. Heroin is a highly addictive opioid that can lead to overdose deaths, especially when mixed with fentanyl. While the bulk of heroin production occurs in Mexico, it also comes from Colombia. Mexican cartels control much of the heroin trade in the U.S., with significant quantities smuggled across the southern border. Cocaine can cause sudden death from heart attack or stroke, and its use is associated with violent behavior and addiction. Although cocaine primarily originates from South America, particularly Colombia, Mexican cartels have become central in its transportation into the U.S. They often control the smuggling routes across the southern border. And last but certainly not least, we have synthetic opioids excluding fentanyl. Drugs like carfentanil are even more potent than fentanyl, posing a high risk of overdose. These drugs can also be produced in clandestine labs within the U.S., but the precursor chemicals often come from or through Mexico, with China being a significant supplier of these chemicals. That brings us to the modern-day societal cancer that the most egregious of virtue signalers consistently turn a blind eye to in the U.S., human trafficking. Many victims trafficked across the U.S. border are exploited for both labor and sex. A significant number of these victims are children, with the risk heightened for those in immigrant or asylum-seeking situations at the border. Traffickers often use deception, force, fraud, or coercion. The U.S. Department of State's 2024 Tracking in Persons report notes that globally, an estimated 27 million people are exploited for labor, services, and commercial sex. Some statistics reveal that between 15,000 to 50,000 people are trafficked each year in the United States, with approximately 25% being children and over 70% being female. Now, it's important to understand that human trafficking is a hidden crime, and statistics often only represent reported cases. The actual numbers might be much higher due to underreporting or fear. Now, aside from the totality of the impact that gang crime has on our nation, we need to consider a few realities to put this danger into perspective. In comparison, the total number of fentanyl-related deaths in the United States from just 2020 to 2023, 473, is over 4 times the number of U.S. soldiers that died in the Vietnam War. That number, 58,220. And almost 2/3 of those who died in World War II. That number, 405,399. In addition to the drug-related deaths, available data from the National Youth Gang Survey analysis by the National Gang Center revealed that gang-related homicides averaged nearly 2,000 annually. Couple that with the 15,000 to 50,000 people that are trafficked each year, and the lives destroyed by the existence of gangs in the United States total over 10 times the number of U.S. soldiers killed during the war in Afghanistan. Yet we still have elected officials at every level indignantly virtue signaling their ignorance by failing to identify this scourge as a full-on attack by foreign paramilitary entities on the American people on American soil. In 2020, U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren, a Democrat from Massachusetts, said, "We need to stop treating migrants and asylum seekers like criminals." U.S. Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey, said, "We need to stop the militarization of our border and instead focus on humane, sensible immigration policies." And Julian Castro, Democrat from Texas, said, "We should decriminalize crossing the border because it's not a crime to seek asylum." In 2021, U.S. Representative Ayanna Pressley, Democrat from Massachusetts and part of the Squad, said, "Our immigration system should be based on compassion, not on punishment. We need to dismantle the cruel, punitive system at our borders." And former Speaker of the House, U.S. Representative Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from San Francisco, said in 2022, "We must recognize the dignity and worth of every individual, and that includes those who seek a better life here crossing our borders." And with regard to the existence and activities of Tren de Aragua in Aurora, Colorado, where gang members terrorized apartment complexes in the expansion of their turf, Aurora Mayor Mike Kaufman made the wholly absurd statement, "The reality is that the concerns about Venezuelan gang activity here have been grossly exaggerated. The incidents were limited to several apartment complexes in the city of more than 400,000 residents." Using Kaufman's reasoning, ceding ground to criminal gangs that trade in drug and human trafficking to the tune of over 275,000 fentanyl-related deaths and 150,000 trafficked humans in just 3 years is acceptable collateral damage in the pursuit of extending benevolence to people who don't even have enough respect for the laws of our country to enter legally in the first place. Kaufman, Pelosi, Booker, Warren, Pressley, and Castro fail to think it through. They fail to consider the damage their virtue signaling, their imbecilic political posturing, and ineffective benevolence causes each day. Honestly, it's stunning they don't forget to breathe. They're so vacuous in their thinking. It's well past time that the moral grandstanding of the open borders left come to the reality that their faux concern for these criminals' civil liberties is killing people, that their virtue signaling and ideologically based social justice posturing is killing people, our children, our brothers and sisters, our parents, and our neighbors. The time has come for government, and this is the number one obligation of government in its compact with the people's security. It's time for the government, on all levels, to unite to form a militaristic response to these gangs in an effort not to control or contain them, but to eradicate them from the country, treating their actions like the acts of war that they are. We wouldn't tolerate ISIS or the Communist Chinese People's Liberation Army to land on our shores and kill 91,000 Americans each year and take another 50,000 prisoner. Why are we allowing organized criminal gangs championed by adversarial nations to do so? There is no defense for allowing this to happen. There is no excuse for allowing this proxy war to continue on American soil. Bottom line, if your truth trumps our kids, then your truth sucks. If our kids aren't worth fighting for, what is? When we come back, our segment on America's Third Watch, broadcast nationally on our flagship station WGUL in Tampa, Florida.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Our federal government has been co-opted by the globalist sycophants of the deep state bureaucracy. At every turn, this bureaucracy expands its power over both the American people and the states in which they live. The framers knew corruptible men would one day bastardize their elected authorities and attempt to centralize government in Washington, D.C. That's why they gave us the 9th and 10th Amendments. That's why they left standing the tool of nullification. In his book, Nullification, The Case for Decentralizing the Federal Government, Frank Salvato lays out how states can claw back their constitutionally mandated powers from the overreach of the federal government, doing so in a manner that prevents a second bloody civil war. Get your copy of Nullification, The Case for Decentralizing the Federal Government. Available on Amazon.com in Kindle form and paperback.
News, insight, passion. AM 930, The Answer.
Well, quite a weekend, to say the least. We have this big change in Syria. We've got a lot of Syrians who are now trying, literally thousands upon thousands of Syrians trying to get back into the country. But J.D. Vance giving us this warning. What do you make of this whole situation, Frank?
It's not our fight.
Indeed.
I'm standing with Donald Trump on this one. They were a Russian satellite nation. Russia was backing them up. They fell. He went to Russia. ISIS has literally taken over. So what do we have to gain by having anything to do with what's going over there? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not unless we want to continue this idea of proxy war this and proxy war that. If ISIS if their splinter groups have taken over and toppled the government of Syria, then the people in that region and the country of Syria have to deal with that. If ISIS launches something against the United States from Syria, that makes it a completely different story. Mm-hmm. But this idea that we have to be involved in everything in the middle, are we supposed to believe that because Assad was toppled and he ran off to Russia, that all of a sudden that's some kind of a win for the U.S. and the West? That doesn't make any sense. There was no chance that they were going to flip to be friendly with the West or flip to be friendly with the United States. If anything, once Putin figures out how to disengage himself from Ukraine, once Trump takes office, maybe he'll start doing something over in Syria again. But that's his problem, the Syrians' problem, and that region's problem. No,
I completely agree. That's exactly right. We don't need our fighting men and women anywhere near that or involved in that, insofar as that, we can keep them away. And we have done some strikes against ISIS. Also, Israel has done some strikes against, what appear to be weapon stockpiles, trying to make sure that it doesn't get used at some point against them.
Well, and that's my point about the people in the region. If Israel believes that for the safety of their nation, they have to strike a weapon stockpile within the Syrian border, then they have to make that calculated decision about whether they want to do that or not to escalate tensions with Syria. But Syria doesn't benefit us to get involved over there in any way, shape, or form. And it's not like we can topple that domino to change the outcome of what's going to happen over there. They've gone from despotic dictator to despotic group. One was a political despot. Now they have a religiously zealot ideological despot organization that is about to take command over there. The people of Syria are going to have to deal with this themselves. If things change, like I said, and they become a direct threat or they strike U.S. troops or assets from their region, then we should react in kind. But it doesn't go along with the Trump doctrine. It really doesn't. And I'm using that term out of school. It's not like the Monroe doctrine or anything like that. But we don't do this tit-for-tat proxy war, Lyndon Johnson type, let's intervene here because we're fighting a larger war. We can do that economically now. We've learned that lesson. We can hurt major and then larger countries economically to the point where they don't do things that we dislike. We don't have to expend blood and treasure in order to do it. So Syria, I wish the people over there who want to be freedom. I don't see that coming anytime soon. Not with an offshoot of ISIS taking control over there.
Exactly. I mean, and we look into Afghanistan, where the Taliban eventually, gained complete control. We know what that means for human rights. We know what it means for women's treatment and women's rights. It's talk about turning the clock back. We might see much of the same thing happening here.
The best thing that we can do for the people of Syria, and even the people of Iran for that matter, and the people of the Middle East who want to be free, is to become energy independent and to become, again, an exporter of energy around the world. That brings their only asset down to in profitability. Their only asset is oil and terror. Tell me what else comes out of the Middle East. Besides poppies from Afghanistan, which fuels the heroin trade. What comes out of the Middle East?
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. And
saffron, maybe.
Yeah, right. Well, Frank, we're all watching this Daniel Penny trial. We saw what happened with the deadlock on the charge of manslaughter. And now the jury supposedly is looking at this charge of criminally negligent homicide. But there's a twist here, isn't there, Frank? Because the judge had said they could never consider that unless they found the defendant not guilty on the first. And here they are considering it.
Once again, we're talking about a court in New York.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how fidelity to procedure and the law exists in New York. You give the jury instructions, then let the jury have the instructions, and that's that. The jury, in my opinion, and I think we covered this last time we spoke, that this shouldn't have even been brought to trial, so the jury should have come back with a not guilty across the board. I mean, any rational human being would have said, this guy was threatening people. Somebody actually was brave enough to stand up and do something to subdue him. And this was a consequence. It wasn't intentful. He didn't intend to, I'm going to get on the subway and kill somebody. That wasn't it. He was actually a good Samaritan trying to protect other people. And when you look at this guy, he had a rap sheet and he had drug problems all the way down the line. So, okay, you can't, unless he's not guilty, you can't consider the second charge. No, that telegraphs a not guilty plea, right? Or at least it should.
Well, sure. And so what they're looking at, this is somehow coercing the jury to come up with a guilty or some such thing like that. But again, I'm hoping that they either just come back with a straight not guilty. But if they do find him guilty, then at the very least, from what I understand, now you've got some reversible error because the judge evidently violated the actual instructions to begin with. And so that could on appeal be something that could happen.
It would be nice, but that means he's on appeal.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree.
And he shouldn't be on appeal. And this all comes down to, in a rational world, and New York is not a rational world. It's just not. The way that New Yorkers and the New York's elected officials have been acting over the last, I'm going to say, 15 years, 20 years, is just odd. It's just odd. It's very arrogant, and it's very, I'm going to get my way no matter what, whether it's right or wrong. It's really suspect. This all boils down to prosecutorial misconduct. Why did they bring this charge? What was the basis? Doesn't common sense mandate that this guy stepped in when no one else would? A police officer who would have been on that train certainly would have. So would they have charged the police officer?
Yeah. Well, in this day and age, that answer is probably. That's the problem, is that we've gotten so far away from exactly what you're talking about. And unfortunately, if somebody's going to be, threatened by somebody else, now people are going to simply say, no way am I getting involved, because it's too costly. And I can't imagine how many people can lose their life because of that.
I absolutely do not mean to make light of this situation, but to put it into context, when you look at the last episode of Seinfeld, and they all went to jail, what did they go to jail for? They saw a crime happen and they did nothing about it.
Right. Yeah. In fact, they were making jokes about the whole thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
As our characters would often do. That kind of thing. Sure.
Yeah. So if in fact that is a sentiment that is out there in the public realm, that when you see something you really should try to right a wrong, then what the hell did this guy do that was wrong?
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right about that. Well, that kind of sways into the next thing here, and that is, social media, of course, is always this very strange place to be. But
it's a cesspool of opinion.
There you go. Well, but in context of the terrible shooting of the CEO Brian Thompson in Midtown Manhattan, there's a lot of people on social media who just seem to be very flippant about this whole thing. They're more outraged about the healthcare system, it seems, and it takes people can now go on and express their opinions. But there's a communications or expert that Newsweek had talked to, and he kind of said this. He said basically that people evidently forget they're talking about real people. That there's no empathy, and that lack of empathy now seems somewhat normal. And again, it's kind of like being a bystander and watching some terrible thing happen. Now we've got these kinds of reactions, and people aren't talking about this should never happen. They're saying, yeah, the healthcare system, is terrible and it's oppressive, that kind of stuff.
It's okay to say that the healthcare system and especially the unholy alliance between big pharma and health insurance industry sucks.
Yeah.
That it doesn't serve the average person very well. It sucks money out of their wallets, and it makes them. It limits them in what they can do when they need it, and it's always to the benefit of the health insurance company or big pharma. It's okay to feel that way, but someone was murdered here. A human being was murdered, and I have to lay a lot of the blame for that lack of empathy at what we consume, not only on social media, but on traditional media. You know, imagine, and this is getting back to the George W. Bush administration. You never heard anybody, as an elected official, call the president or another colleague in either chamber of Congress a liar. Never. Mm-hmm. Never. And not only is it commonplace now it's commonplace to call people Nazis and fascists and Hitler. And it's, we have to put him in a bullseye and he should be eliminated. This extreme caustic nature of what this opinion mill in the 24/7 news cycle, especially, it has conditioned us to have a lack of empathy. We hear it so much. These derogatory things and the hate that is spewed at someone who doesn't agree with you. We've been conditioned to have no empathy towards somebody. Well, he was a CEO of an insurance company? Screw him.
Right.
I'm glad he's dead. No, we can't be that. We can't be that people. We shouldn't be that people.
Right.
It's okay to be ticked about something when it's not working, but we have to be a little bit more intellectual about how we go about protesting it with our words and our deeds and how we correct it. Because becoming Gotham in the Joker is not the way to go.
Yeah. Well, what it does, it sets up now, this evidently was not a kind of a professional hit that would have been, quote unquote, ordered by somebody, but it sets this thing up where he hits the CEO and then somebody else is going to try to hit somebody else back if they figure out if there is some group or other people supporting him. I mean, it just, where does it all end? You're exactly right with the Gotham sort of analogy here.
Well, the people who have desensitized us to empathy for others are absolutely responsible for the product they've created. You don't feed people. You don't feed people hate on a regular basis and expect them not to find hate to be normal. That's why I find no use, besides the fact that it's intellectually stunted all the way around. I find no use in The View. I find no use in Joy Reid. I find no use in the entirety of MSNBC. All they do is shop division and hate and disgruntledness. Yeah. It's no wonder we're desensitized to it and have no empathy.
One of the things, of course, is that Donald Trump has talked about the January 6th people who are still languishing in prison. They haven't had their trials yet, obviously. He's talking about pardoning them. But Donald Trump also mentioned something about Adam Schiff, and that is that he thinks that some of these people on the committees should also go to jail. I don't know if that's going to happen, but pretty strong words there from the president-elect.
Let's see if good old Joe issues those blanket pardons that go into that go back retro before we get out there on that diving board. That's just stunning that they're even contemplating. Let's just do preemptive pardons for people, even though there's been no adjudication of guilt. How about that? But
Yeah,
I bet you Capone would have loved that.
No kidding. That's right. Well, how about future pardons? Anything Schiff ever does, it's fine.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Now, as you know, and we all understand that Donald Trump speaks in a gruff sort of way, but there are some people here, and there should be an investigation into how these things were done, what information was actually gathered and not used, manipulated, or omitted in order to come to a conclusion about an event that is actually something that will make the history books. There's an obligation by government to do that. But he's going to be very careful going forward with examining these people for a number of different things, including the Biden crime family, to make sure it doesn't look like retribution. And that means, everything's got to be by the book, and it's got to be by the numbers, and it can't be we're going after him just because he went after me. Now, do I care for Adam Schiff? No, I don't. I think he's a colossal imbecile. He's so incredibly partisan that you can see his puppet strings just yanking on his hands and his feet and at the corners of his mouth. He really has no fidelity to the truth whatsoever. And the people of California, and I apologize for this, Kyle, the people of California should be ashamed that this imbecile is going to Washington, D.C. as their senator. That's just stunning.
Yeah, well, we tried to make it Steve Garvey, but Adam Schiff.
Horrible campaign.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, but Adam Schiff, though, to be, and I think you're being too nice with the colossal imbecile thing, but it's really quite accurate, and I think that they're running this game because this is just a game maneuver here, to try to get some seniority. I think to put Gavin Newsom in a better position if he ever wins the presidency.
A little information for Mr. Schiff, who is going there early in the 118th Congress. He'll still have no seniority in the 119th Congress as a new senator. He's still going to be a tier 1. So that's that. So if he thought he was going to get in there early and be able to cut in line, Adam's going to be a little disappointed.
Well, hopefully so. But
Gavin Newsom, everybody has to remember, and this is going forward, and I'm going to thump this every time I hear this man's name now going forward, because he honestly has the arrogance to believe that he's got a political future at the federal level. He was almost recalled by the people of California. He survived by the skin of his teeth. That's not the kind of person we need in federal government. It's the kind of person who should go away.
But he's so telegenic. This is the whole, I think that's the part of their whole thing, and he's from California but I just don't know how he makes it look good to say, look what I've done for California when it's running it into the ground.
If being telegenic was a criteria for being in public office, then you'd have to explain Joint Behar to me. No.
Yeah.
It's California is the model for what not to do with government. You have a state with abundant natural resources. It's one of the most beautiful states in the United States. From the north to the south, it's got just about everything. And they've figured a way how to not only make it bankrupt and in the red to the, I believe now it's getting really, really close to $1 trillion in being in the rears. And it's a place where farmers can't grow food because they've taken the water away, because eco-zealots have said you can't have water where water used to be. So why is that a model? Why should we be elevating anybody from the cobalt blue Democrat government of California to the federal stage? I don't think anybody from California, New York, Illinois, that's my home state from where I grew up. That's why I left. None of those people should be elevated to the federal level. They should be models for what we shouldn't do.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear you. You know, where Donald Trump talks about tariffs, a lot of times it's looked at as being ultimately a threat, although he does praise the use of tariffs in his first administration. But another thing that he's threatening, quote unquote, is NATO. He was asked about this on Meet the Press, and he's saying, well, you know, if they pay their bills, then we'll stay in NATO. Is this another Donald Trump gambit that he's running to, again, demonstrate that, hey, we can't keep a foot in the bill all the time?
The NATO Secretary General has already come out and said, yes, we're paying more. You know, because the first time around, he made his point. I mean, everybody's looking, oh, Donald Trump's going to do this. Donald Trump's going to do that. Oh, my God, it's going to be a catastrophe. He's going to pull out on NATO. This is the same thing he did last time. He said, we're not going to pay everybody's bills. Pay your bills. You know, we'd love to stay in it. We're not going anywhere. We're not going to pull out of NATO. We're just not going to be the open wallet.
Right.
That's what he's saying. He's like, hey, we're going to pay what we're supposed to pay. That's about it. You know, so if that's being egregious, that we're expecting other NATO nations to pay what they're contractually obligated to, then we've gone mad.
Well, this is Donald Trump, the businessman, knowing how to, navigate to the end that he needs to get to. And if that means there needs to be some bluster, there needs to be some of these quote unquote threats, you know, that's how he gets from point A to point B. Otherwise, we never get there.
You think about who's upset about what he's saying. The fact that the United States won't continually bleed its people in tax dollars to pay the bills of the world means that the ingrate bubblehead morons over at the World Economic Forum don't get to have their way on the global stage because their piggy bank is empty. So the deep state here in the United States, who's chained at the neck to a leash that George Soros and Klaus Schwab hold on to as they walk down the streets so arrogantly, they don't have the power that they have anymore if the purse strings are suddenly closed. Now they become inconsequential. So the deep state's going to push back against this as hard as they can, and their number one tool to push back is the sycophantic media that's going to create this chaos and panic over the words that Donald Trump uses. It didn't destroy anything the first time. In fact, it made our country stronger and more cohesive. It'll do the same thing again, so everybody just needs to calm the hell down.
Well said, Frank.
You're listening to Underground USA.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is often laced into illicit drugs and used to make fake versions of prescription pills. You can't see it, taste it, or smell it. Suppliers mix fentanyl into their products because it's potent and cheap, and the dealer might not even know. Keep yourself and others safe by knowing the real deal on fentanyl. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com.
Bank of America wants to control how you live your life. They're building a system to track your carbon emissions and monitor your driving, coming after your Second Amendment rights, favoring certain home buyers based on their race. Bank of America is using a social score system straight out of China's playbook. Bank of America is obsessed with trying to control your life. What will they do next? Bank of America. Their lies start with their name.
If you like the podcast, please head on over to undergroundusa.com and sign up for our Substack. It comes directly into your email box, circumventing the censors and fact-checkers of social media, two useless entities that should be rendered to the ash heap of history. And as we go forward to the Christmas season and into the new year, please remember to talk politics, current events, and even religion with your family, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. Do it respectfully, use facts, and please listen as much as you talk. Because when we hear each other, we realize we have more in common than we do in difference. And when we realize that, the dividers of the globalist elite and the deep state, they lose their power to divide us. We exist in e pluribus unum, and that's a beautiful place to be in a land where we're supposed to be free and government is supposed to serve us. You're listening to Underground USA. My name is Frank Salvador. No fear, no wokeism, and no political correctness.